So how is this going to play out? It's a good time to be an old American. It's not a good time to be a young American, I assure you. My children, my teenage children are going to have huge problems in their lifetimes. Not of their making. I see the signs that always happen towards the end. But come back in 6 months, come back next year, and people are not going to be so happy.
Mm.
And you and I and everybody watching this can shout from the rooftops and vote against it. But unfortunately, there'll be mobs who'll say, you're a pacifist, you're whatever, you're a friend of the enemy.
Mm-hmm.
The United States is the largest debtor nation in the history of the world. No country in world history has been as deep in debt as we are. And it gets worse every day. Our history is pretty clear. When you get into that kind of situation, you're going to have problems, whoever you are. And Washington can say, not us, we're Americans. Well, history doesn't care. History doesn't make a differentiation. So the changes are taking place. When war fever attacks, everybody is in favor. Everybody gets swept away with it. I mean, pick your country, any country. They're all very keen.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, I am absolutely delighted today to have the one and only Jim Rogers on the call. He was by very popular demand, so I'm so excited to have Jim here. Welcome, Jim, to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Neil, I'm delighted to be here. It's my pleasure, my honor. I'm flattered.
Oh, thank you. So it says online you're now 81 years young. Is that the correct age now?
I am, in fact, 81 years old. I don't know who told you that, but they are accurate. And
it took a bit of digging to find all of your info. There's all sorts of stories and myths online, so I thought I'd get the correct information. Born in Baltimore, raised in Alabama, USA.
I grew up in a small backwoods town in Alabama. Yes. My phone number was 5. It was that kind of place. And that's not a typo. My telephone number was 5, just 1 5.
Wow.
A long time ago.
Yeah, it's quite fascinating your background actually. It says you traveled around the world on a bike and then you did it again in a car. You did 116 countries. So you've got my 70, I don't know what I've done, 75, something like that. You've got me well and truly beat.
Well, I'm not doing this to beat you, for goodness sakes, Evan. I mean, I'm just doing it to have fun and have adventure. But now that I know we have a contest, I better get going. Better find some more.
Yeah. What was your favorite country, first of all, that you traveled through, or if you have one?
Well, I don't have an answer to that because I don't have one. I mean, it was fascinating everywhere I went. I mean, I was once held hostage in the Congo for 8 days. And even that was an adventure. And I mean, since I'm alive and since I'm not dead and since it didn't cost me a lot of money, I'm quite happy. I was held hostage by the sheriff. He took me home to dinner with his family. We went to the nightclubs together. It was all very civilized. Just he wanted money. He wanted more money.
Wow, gosh. Is there a country that you traveled to back then that you know you couldn't travel to now, today? So maybe there's war in that country or something you know today you couldn't travel to.
I cannot, well, I didn't go to North Korea on that trip. I've been to North Korea a couple of times, but they
Wow.
wouldn't let us in on that trip. I guess North Korea is the only place I want to go. That's what comes to mind. I've been to North Korea twice, as I said, but now I cannot go. Donald Trump thought he was going to get the Nobel Peace Prize, and the U.S. Army said, "No, Mr. Trump, we're not going to play ball." And so he got angry and said, "Okay, Now, no Americans can go to North Korea. So I cannot go again. I would like to go back. I'm very, very keen to go back to North Korea to see what's happening. But that's the only place that comes to mind. I'm sure before this talk is over, I'll think of 6 other places.
Wow. Well, I'll let everyone into and you into a little secret. I would like to go to North Korea at some point to do a documentary there and to actually see if it is the way the Western media portrays North Korea. I'd like to see if there's anything that's not quite the way they say, as I always like to do.
Well, one of the things I have learned, Neil, in my many years is propaganda is nearly always wrong. Nearly always wrong.
Yeah.
So whatever you've been told is probably wrong about everywhere. It's probably wrong.
Yeah.
But North Korea, it was interesting. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, well, that's a good point, actually, Jim, because you're in Singapore. I want to ask you about that. I'm currently in Bangkok. I just flew in again because I was in the south. I just flew in last night, so I'm still probably a little bit red-eyed. But I just flew in last night again to Bangkok. So this is my second month now. It's quite interesting since all the lockdowns and everything. They've started giving a lot more re-entry visas here. So you can do up to 6 months now. You just fly in whenever you feel like. But I want to talk a lot about Asia with you a little bit later on. And you actually gave a quote on Asia as well. But I want to start by asking you about Singapore as to why you moved from the USA to Singapore and when it was that you did that, because I'm not sure what year you moved.
Well, for 25 or 30, 40 years, probably, I've been telling people to teach your children and grandchildren Chinese because it's going to be the most important language in their lifetime. Then I had one. Oh, what do I do now? So we were in New York. We got a Chinese governess, and my daughter was speaking great Chinese. But many people told me that when she becomes 8, 10, 12 years old, she won't speak it anymore because it's not cool. And one day she actually came home from the park and was crying and said, "Everybody speaks Spanish. I want to speak Spanish. They think I'm crazy because I speak Chinese." So we realized that if we were serious, and we obviously were, we had to move to a Chinese-speaking city. We tried all the cities in China, but they were extremely polluted then. Singapore is not polluted. They speak English. I don't speak Chinese. So Singapore seemed to be the perfect choice for them to learn Mandarin and to know Asia, because in their lifetime, Asia and Mandarin is going to be extremely important. Now, it doesn't mean that they're going to be successful, Leo. It doesn't mean anything. But if they wind up working in a Chinese restaurant, at least they'll be the maitre d'. They won't be the dishwasher. So that's why we came here.
Yeah.
For my daughters.
Wow. Wow. That's amazing. So this was the statement I found online, Jim. It says, if you were smart in 1807, you moved to London. If you were smart in 1907, you moved to New York. And if you are smart in 2007, you moved to Asia. Is that a correct statement or quote?
That's a real live statement, which I made in New York to a reporter in 2007, as I was moving to Asia. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Great.
And in retrospect, historically, it was correct. How did I know? How did I get it right?
Yeah. Do you know, I'll tell you something really strange as well, something funny. A week or two ago, I was in a used bookshop in Bangkok and I saw this book. It said Jim Rogers, A Bull in China or something like that. And I thought, oh, that is the irony of that when we'll be speaking in a couple of weeks' time. I did get it, by the way. It's in my suitcase. I grabbed it. It was a couple of dollars. So there we go.
Well, I mean, my children need royalties, so buy as many as you can.
Yeah.
Used, I don't think we get royalties. I don't think we get royalties on used books. So
No.
Buy the new ones.
Yes, yes, of course, of course. Um, so I was reading this article, and I actually did a video on it it's probably about 3 weeks ago now, on my weekly walk and talk, and it was from Time Out, and they did this big spread on the 20 top most amazing cities in the world, and there wasn't a single Asian city on it. It was no,
What?
not one, and it was number one was New York. I, I was amazed by this. Number one was New York. It was sort of New York, your London, your Paris. And I made a joke about it on the channel. And I said, these are the most crime-ridden, filthy cities I've ever been to in my life. So I found this little video on TikTok, and it was this lady who put a camera on her 3-year-old, and it was just, she wanted to see what her 3-year-old said about the city. So she's walking through New York and she says, this city stinks. There's rubbish everywhere, which is garbage for the Americans. I don't like this. I want to go home. I need a mask. It stinks so much, and all this sort of stuff. And I thought that was quite funny. Although if she came to Bangkok, she'd say the same thing. She'd say there's rubbish everywhere and it stinks. But there's a beauty of each city. I think it doesn't, everyone has their different preferences and what they like about cities. And I was just amazed that there wasn't a single Asian city on that list. Not one single city.
What was the publication?
Time Out. It's very
That's published in London, isn't it? Or New York?
It's out of, I don't know where I don't know where their headquarters is, but it's published in New York and it's published in London and a few other places. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I am
Very
I'm like you. I will tell you, that is extremely provincial magazine, a provincial writer, because my gosh, there's some fabulous cities out there in the world, outside of Europe and North America, and
Yeah.
especially in Asia. Oh my gosh, remarkable.
I think it comes back to what we were saying a few minutes ago. And for example, I saw another video recently. I've started watching a lot of TikTok because when the Western media says Chinese Communist Party, you can't watch TikTok. That's when I start watching. I wasn't watching it before, and now I'm really enjoying it. I can see why a lot of people are watching it. Actually, there's a lot of truthful stuff on there, and it showed this fascinating video of Wuhan, China, which I only know from the, all that sort of business. But it showed this man getting on this monorail electric train. It was all glass. You could see through the floor. I couldn't believe it. And then he gets off, and it was an electric taxi, and it was self-driving. There was no driver in the taxi. And in the West, they say, oh, we're 5 or 6 years away from that. I did not know that in Asia, they already have these things, self-driving taxis and these high-speed rail everywhere, these monorails, there's no drivers. Jim, talk about that for a minute for us, please, because I think you need to educate people on what Asia cities are like.
Well, Neil, if you read the Western press, Wuhan has the virus. What are you talking about? Driverless taxis. The reason they have driverless taxis, they all died from the virus. That's what the Western press says. I like Wuhan. Been to Wuhan several times, and it's an interesting city. And I was actually there the day the virus broke out. I was speaking to 1,000 people. I thought nobody would come. They all showed. And maybe they're all dead now. I'm not dead, but maybe everybody else is. But no, Wuhan's great. Many Asian cities are astonishing, remarkable. I mean, Tokyo, what an exciting city, etc. Shanghai, oh my gosh, no.
Yeah.
Hong Kong.
Do you see then a lot of opportunity in Asia? Do you still believe what you believed back in, what was it, 2007 sort of period when you thought that? Do you still believe there's a lot of opportunity?
I mean, Neil, look out the window. Asia is the future. Whether
Yeah.
we like it or not, there are a lot of people who don't like it and don't acknowledge it. But this is where the people live. This is where the capital is. They don't have the gigantic debts that we have in the West.
Mm.
No, I mean, whether we like it or not, and I lived in New York for many years and love New York, still love New York, but I, I'm bringing my children up in Asia, and maybe I'm wrong, but in my view, Asia is in their lifetime going to be the most important.
Yeah, yeah. And from the cities I've been to, they were really beautiful. And I'll say one other thing that surprised me, and it was the amount of luxury here. The last time I went to a mall in, I think it was probably America. I think it was Florida. There was a couple of luxury stores, your Armani, your Louis Vuitton, and things like that. Here, every single mall, if I've needed to go and buy something, has got all of these designer shops. And it's making me say the market has changed rapidly. And you're sort of seeing this shift, this massive swing towards who's buying the luxury goods as well. And I was looking at the data on it. And it's quite interesting to see this massive swing towards China and a lot of the Southeast Asian countries buying these luxury products. So there's obviously a lot of money there. And I'm seeing a lot more Chinese. In fact, I went for breakfast just a couple of hours ago. The whole place was Chinese. I think my wife and I, the only white people in there. It was all Chinese. So I thought that was quite telling because it's not a cheap hotel. So it shows you that there's a lot of money shifting now. And I know China's economy is slowing a little bit. There's deflation and things, but there's a lot of shift going on. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Well, what you just observed is certainly anybody who walks down the street in Asia can see the changes you're talking about. But remember, 100 years ago, Britain was the richest, most powerful country in the world. There was no number two. 50 years later, Britain was bankrupt. That's not a typo. Literally, the IMF had to bail them out.
Yeah.
So it went from the number one and richest to bankrupt. This kind of thing has been happening for hundreds of years, whether we like it or not. The United States, and I'm an American citizen, the United States is the largest debtor nation in the history of the world. No country in world history has been as deep in debt as we are, and it gets worse every day. Our history is pretty clear. When you get into that kind of situation, you're going to have problems, whoever you are. And Washington can say, not us, we're Americans. Well, history doesn't care. History doesn't make a differentiation. So the changes are taking place. There's huge amounts of money and brains in Asia, and it's on the rise again. I mean, there's nothing we can do about it. We may not like it. We can talk about the horrible so-and-so people, but it's irrelevant,
Yeah.
if you ask me.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. There's actually quite a profound historical theory around the pendulum swing from east to west, and this has been happening for multiple generations. This swing that happens every however many centuries, and it looks to me, just from my observations, that we're deep into this. We're probably halfway into this. Well, maybe not halfway, but we're into this swing now where we're seeing that. And if you look at a lot of the metrics behind that, one of them was the work ethic. And it's I don't think my viewers will be offended by this because they agree with me on a lot of things I say. But the work ethic here was surprising to me. I just haven't seen people just stood around doing the thing. I haven't really seen people just on their phones. Most of the people are busy. They're cleaning, they're doing all sorts of things all day long. And you're seeing a lot of it's just like this energy in the air. I feel like there's an energy from the different places I've been on this trip in Southeast Asia. There's an energy everywhere of I want to improve myself. I want to improve my life, maybe improve the family's life. Would you say that's correct, or am I off there?
Oh, well, of course. I mean, it doesn't matter where you are in Asia, at least from where I have been. If you drive down the highway, everybody is working from dawn to dusk. Everybody. I mean, it's astonishing. It's remarkable. Now, whether we like it or not, that's why many companies move to Asia because they want to tap into this educated, hardworking, disciplined work ethic. Yeah.
Mm,
Now, Britain had this work ethic 100 years ago.
yeah.
America had this work ethic 50 years ago. No, it's happened throughout history that people learn that they have to work hard, and they do work hard. That's all they know. But then their children and grandchildren say, oh, that's hard work. I
Mm,
don't want to work hard. I want a free lunch, So then that country goes into decline.
yeah.
It's not the first time this has happened.
Yeah. On that, I was reading a fascinating article about a week ago now, and it talked all about this actually. And it was quite a controversial article because it was talking about migration, and it was getting into legal versus illegal migration and all this. It was quite controversial. I won't go into all of it, but they were talking about how a migrant comes in and then they'll do anything to work, and then they'll raise their kids up, and then the kids become more lazy because they've got this better lifestyle, and then the grandkid becomes super lazy and whatever. So again, I'm not saying I completely agree with it, but it was quite an interesting theory on everything going on. And his theory was about US migration, why they're letting so many people in, and then he was talking about war and all sorts of things. Quite interesting. And that's one thing I want to ask you about shortly, actually. I do want to ask you about the war aspect that we're going into that cycle. But before that, I want to get on to a bit of economics. And I want to ask you, how do you see I mean, go as detailed or surface levels you want with this, but how do you see the global economy right now? Do you agree with the sort of IMF reports and things like that? Or in fact, forget the IMF reports. Let me just hear it from Jim Rogers. How do you see the global economy right now?
Well, Neil, first let me go back. Most cultures have a saying that rags to rags in 3 generations. Everybody knows, the first generation starts all hardworking, ambitious, saves their money, invests. Second generation continues that, but by the third generation, they go to hell. They go to pot, they go to seed, as we say. Uh, and it's I mean, every society has this saying. So it's something about human beings. It's not something about Germans or Americans or Chinese. It's just the way human beings are. So everything you said before, yes, we human beings like to be lazy if we can, but if we cannot, we know we cannot, and we know what we have to do. We have to work hard and save our money. And that's happening in Asia now, if you ask me. I mean, the Japanese are starting to suffer some because they got rich, but in the 50s, oh my gosh, you remember Mr. Honda? What a hardworking, he didn't know. He was just a hardworking guy who wanted to make motorcycles.
Yeah.
And he didn't know he wanted to get rich. But I mean, now everybody named Honda is rich because of that old man. And that has happened in many countries. So that is what has happened and is happening in Asia. But do not worry. They'll get rich and they'll retire and they'll decline just like everybody else. Unfortunately, there are usually a few wars that come along throughout history. It's I don't know why mankind hasn't figured out that wars are never successful. Even the people who win aren't successful, but they keep doing it for some strange reason. Sorry, I forgot. I wandered away from your question. What was your
No, no,
question? You had a
no,
good
no.
question.
Yeah, you're fine, Jeff. It was really about the global economy now, but you can actually
Oh,
link
the global economy.
with that if you like. I have some quite more extreme theories on what's happening here, but I want to hear yours will be more conservative than mine. Your theories on what's happening.
Well, I can look out the window. The central banks around the world have printed gigantic amounts of money in the past few years. I mean, the Bank of Japan, the guy goes to work every morning very early because he's a good Japanese bureaucrat, and he starts printing, printing, printing. But that's been happening all over the world. And when there's a staggering amount of money printed, I mean, Neil, if you give me $1 trillion, I will show you a very, very good time. Oh my gosh, you and I will party all night, all week, all year with all that money. And that's what's going on right now. And many central banks have printed a lot of money and borrowed a lot of money and spent a lot of money. The US has had the longest period in American history without a serious problem. It's never happened like this before. Now, maybe it's going to go on forever. The Secretary of the Treasury in the U.S. says, no, don't worry, we've solved all these problems. But she went to two very famous Ivy League universities. Maybe she knows what she's talking about. I doubt it, but maybe she does. No, the world is fat and happy right now, but I see the signs that always happen towards the end. Everybody believes it'll go on forever, et cetera, et cetera. So no, everybody's great. If you look out the window, you'll see everybody's happy. But come back in 6 months, come back next year, and people are not going to be so happy.
Yeah. I think you're onto something there. It's just interesting because a lot of people relate the stock market with the economy. I hear this all the time when I'm trying to, explain certain things. People say, oh, well, the stock market's roaring and everything like that. Well, yeah, of course the stock market's going to be roaring when you've got, as you say, trillions being printed. You've got so much liquidity. Got to, it's got to go somewhere. And I think this is one thing people didn't understand with the inflation as well. The average person on the street didn't understand that the inflation was the tax. They didn't understand that that's what caused the food prices. And well, there's more to do with food prices actually, but they didn't understand a lot of this inflation was from all the printing, giving stimulus and giving all this other stuff out without actually creating products and services or output behind it. So yeah, I do agree with you. And I think we are slowing down now. We're seeing this with the global economy. We're seeing it slowing down. The question will be, will the markets react in exactly the same way with the slowdown if they go back to QE? Now, there's a lot of bets at the moment. I'm seeing people talking about, is it going to be rate cuts first by the Fed or is it going to be QE? I'm leaning towards QE as opposed to rate cuts first. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, I would hasten to tell you I am not selling short. I am not selling short yet. I'm not buying. I'm buying in Uzbekistan and a few isolated places, but basically I am not buying. But I'm not selling short yet either, because I don't see that we're at the stage where it's an end. But I hasten to tell you, Neil, I am not good at market timing. I guess they should watch you for the market timing. Don't ask me
Not
about
me.
market timing. I'm hopeless at it. But I can see many of the signs that have happened before towards the end. Everybody's enthusiastic. New investors come in. They call their friends and say, I've discovered this new thing called the stock market, and it's fun. And you can make money. And it's easy. It's easy to make money.
Yeah.
I mean, this is not the first time this has happened, not in history, and certainly not in my lifetime. So I see the signs that we will have another end. We will have a bear market, and it will affect the whole world, because if the US and Japan and places like that have bear markets, it affects the whole world. And by the way, I'm not suggesting it's the time to sell Japan by any stretch. Japan will probably go back to its old high. Its old high was 34 years ago.
Yeah, correct.
So I see good things happening in markets if you are invested, and if you're not a jaded, old, experienced investor like me. You know, I've seen it all before. I know how it's going to end. But one of the lessons of history, perhaps the most important lesson of history, is that people do not learn the lessons of history. I mean, history is very, very. You remember Mr. Hitler. I mean, Mr. Hitler invaded Russia. Now, you would think that somebody in Berlin would have told him, Mr. Hitler, there have been other people who've tried this before, and it's been a disaster. But for some reason, he did not read or understand the lessons of history, that trying to march on Moscow was not necessarily a good idea. But he said, who cares? I'm smarter than history. We have a president in the U.S., our last president. He thought he was smarter than history. He knew he was smarter than history. So these guys come along. If they know history, they don't care. They think they're smarter than history. I know I'm not smarter than history.
Yeah. Now, we're both scholars of history, Jim. You and I, we both love our history. And you're right. All the patterns we're seeing now, we did see just prior to Great Depression, the Roaring Twenties, as it was. It's very similar patterns where you've got everybody jumping into the markets now. Now, like you, I don't claim to be a good market timer myself. I tend to dollar cost average if I'm going into the markets at the time. But actually, one of my biggest sort of strategies at the moment is in real estate. So I do a lot of holiday apartments, vacation rentals, and things like that. And these serve me really well. So just for clarity, if everyone's wondering what I'm in at the moment, I wanted to ask you about commodities, because you seem to, whenever I look at commodities, I always sort of see your name there. Would you say that's your specialty, is commodities expertise?
Well, I do know a little bit about commodities. I've been investing in commodities for a long, long time. But I've been investing in a lot of things for a long, long time. Been investing in stocks around the world, bonds around the world, currencies around the world, both the long side and the short side. But yes, no, actually, I can remember early in my days on Wall Street, when I would read the Wall Street Journal, there was one page about commodities. Well, I used to read that page. Then I realized very few other people read that page and knew anything about commodities. And I thought I realized, here's an opportunity. You know, there's this gigantic market that most people don't seem to know much about.
Yeah.
So I learned as much as I could.
Yeah.
I hope I still know a little about commodities. Because I mean, things like oil is the biggest market in the world.
Yeah.
And yet, well, now everybody knows there's an oil market, but in the old days, very few people knew it, even traded.
Yeah. I was going to ask you there, what sort of top tips would you give to people, my subscribers, who want to get into commodities a little bit more? Maybe they know, they're fairly good at investing, because I have a stock market course, which of course I'm going to say is good, but people say is very good. I don't really cover commodities in there. And sometimes people ask me about that, about commodities and things like that. It's not really something that I get heavily involved in. I mean, I track certain things, oil and, lithium and, all the stuff that we need for EVs and things like that. Is there any tips you would give to people who want to know more and learn more about commodities? Is there any that they should look into, etc.?
Well, my main and emphatic suggestion is that you stay with what you know. And if you know a little bit about sugar, or if you like sugar, for instance, learn more about sugar. I mean, sugar is a gigantic market. Fortunes made and lost every day in the sugar market. Very few people know that you can even buy and sell sugar. They just know it's down at that 5-pound bag of sugar. I want one. I want one of those, That's about all they know. But everything, cotton, wheat, oil, silver, all of these things trade on the markets. And most of us know a little bit about wheat. Most of us know a little bit about silver because we've seen it, we use it.
Yeah.
And if you have a basic knowledge, build on what you know, learn more about it, and perhaps you'll make a lot of money. Perhaps. You might also lose a lot of money.
Yeah, that's great advice, actually. One thing that people don't know, one of the ways this channel actually grew was because I made a video back in, I think it was 2020, and it was called Why I Went All In on Silver. It's one of the most popular videos on my channel. And I was looking at the gold to silver ratio, and I saw it spike to 120 to 1. And of course, I knew because I'd studied the ratio, I knew, hold on, silver's either ridiculously cheap or gold's massively overpriced right now. So I went in on silver, and I did actually make 100% return on that. And I think that's one of the things that launched the channel quite well. So what you're saying is really important there, and it is good to learn certain things, like something like the gold to silver ratio is, something as simple as that. If people can learn about the very basics of certain commodities, there's all sorts of things actually we could talk about, but I want to move on to the next topic, if that's okay, and ask you your views on CBDCs, so central bank digital currencies. How do you feel about those, Jim?
Well, nearly every government or central bank in the world is working on digital currency, computer money, call it what you will. And we are all going to have computer money eventually. Governments love it. It's cheaper. It's certainly much more efficient. They can keep, and the main reason they love it is because they know everything you do.
Yeah.
They're going to call you up one day, Neil, and say, Neil, you've been drinking too much coffee this month. Cut down on your coffee, because they know everything.
Yeah.
And they love that. Now, I think it's absurd and crazy and bad, but that's not the way governments think.
Yeah.
They're going to know everything we do eventually, and it will save them a lot of money because they don't have to print it and transport it and track it, etc. So it's coming, whether we like it or not. Is it going to be Bitcoin? I doubt it. I cannot imagine that, say, Washington is going to say, okay, guys, this is money now. But if you want to use that money, you can use that money. That's not the way governments think. They want control, they want monopoly, and they don't want to lose their ability to track everything. But it's coming. It is very clear to me that someday my children will only know digital money.
Yeah. Are there any countries you think are going to be more nefarious than others with this digital currency?
Well, China's ahead of most of us now. I mean, you cannot take a taxi in China with money. You have to take a taxi with your telephone if you want to take a taxi in China. If you want to buy ice cream, you have to use your telephone in China. But I mean, everybody's working on it. Everybody will catch up. I mean, it's going to happen again. Do I like it? Doesn't matter whether I like it or not. Washington likes it. Tokyo likes it. And these places like it. So it's coming.
Yeah. On that same thread, then, I own about 10% of my assets in cryptocurrency. So most of it is Bitcoin. There's a couple of others that I own as well. And I don't believe you own any cryptocurrency. Is that correct?
Who, me?
Yeah.
No, I own no crypto. I've never bought nor sold short any cryptocurrencies. Now, Neil, I wish I'd bought all when it was $1. I wish I'd bought all the Bitcoin in the world when it was $2. I also wish I'd bought IBM in 1914. And many things I wish in my investment career. No, I've never bought any of them. And my main reason is I see them as fine, the trading currency, trading vehicles, which is fine, but I'm not a trader, so I never bothered. Now, many of the believers, of course, are certain that this is going to be the new currency, but I don't see Washington saying, hey, guys, okay, you don't have to use US dollars if you don't want to. Use that computer money if you want.
Yeah.
That's not the way that's not the way governments think.
Yeah. No, I agree with you on that. I hear it a lot that Bitcoin will be the currency of the world in the future. I just, I don't see it. I mean, it would be great if we had a currency like Bitcoin or Bitcoin as the currency, but because it would give so much freedom. But as you say, governments do not like competition. They really don't. And they're going to do anything possible to have only their CBDC, which is going to do all the things you said and a lot more. It's going to be complete control over people, which is a little bit concerning. Well, not a little bit concerning to me and my subscribers. We're very concerned about CBDCs. Very concerned indeed.
Well, I am too. I wish everybody were, but unfortunately, the bureaucrats have the guns. I don't have any guns.
Yeah.
Even if I had guns, I don't have enough guns to stop Washington.
Yeah.
They want to do it, they will.
Yeah. Yeah. Back in 2008, then we had 11 trillion in debt. And when we had I'm just reading my notes here, and then we had a severe recession. We've now got 34 trillion just in the US in terms of debt. And that's all without going into the derivatives market. So I wanted to ask you, how do you see this playing out? Because I was just reading earlier today that now the interest on the debt is something like the defense contracts or something like that. It's approaching the same amount per year, the interest on the debt. How do you see this playing out? I mean, is there a limit to where this 34 trillion can rise to before it's just game over? How do you see this playing out?
Well, I want to repeat something I said before. In 1924, 100 years ago, Britain was the richest, most powerful country in the world. There was no number two. 50 years later, only 50 years later, Britain was bankrupt. Literally, the IMF had to fly to London airport and bail them out. They couldn't pay their bills. Now, that happened in less than one generation, or 50 years anyway.
Yeah.
But it's happened before. The French went through it. The Spanish went through it. Everybody went through this kind of thing. Chinese, once upon a time, were unbelievably rich, 3 or 4 times, in fact. For whatever reason, it has always happened that when you're on top, your children and grandchildren are not on top. So how is this going to play out? It's a good time to be an old American. It's not a good time to be a young American, I assure you. My teenage children are going to have huge problems in their lifetimes. Not of their making, but of my generation's making and my parents' generations. No, I mean, it's very simple. It has always ended badly. There's never been a time in world history when a country or a company or a family goes deep, deep, deep into debt and doesn't suffer for it, doesn't have to pay the price. Now, of course, some guys are very good at debt and they get rich, property, shipping, whatever. But those cases are very few and very far between.
Mm-hmm.
And their children probably don't keep it. Their children and grandchildren probably lose it all.
Yeah, yeah. I've got a more extreme theory I want to run by you, get your feedback on. World War One, if you think about what happened with the US, they came out really as the economic winners with World War One. We then had something similar in World War Two. I mean, you think US stayed out of it until quite late. you talked about Hitler going into Russia. Actually, that was that was a massive advantage for Britain. If he didn't go into Russia and lose so many of troops and equipment, he would have probably come into Britain quite. There was a lot of mistakes actually. There was there's a lot of movies on this now, but there's all sorts of mistakes that he made, letting the British Army get back across and all sorts of things. But you think about what happened World War II. And the US was just it was a bit like China, the factory of the world in terms of what China produces now. The US was I guess we can say, the military factory of the world. And they were producing everything and selling it. And as we know, the gold then flowed to the US. And at the end of the war, the US had the reserve currency because they had the gold. And then 1970, 71 era, Nixon took us off the gold standard. So we had all these things sort of take place. Now, here's why I say I've got more of an extreme theory, in that the US has this 34 trillion in debt. We have a lot of problems now. And what are we seeing? We're seeing a proxy war, Russia, Ukraine. We're now seeing all the conflict in the Middle East, Hamas, Israel. And then what might happen with China, Taiwan? That could be the third sort of strike nail in the coffin. Perhaps, and here's my theory, perhaps the US might want to have some sort of conflict, might want to have some sort of war, because if the currency is going the way it's going, with the BRICS currencies as well coming in and dumping a lot of the dollars, maybe this could be beneficial for the US. What do you think of my quite extreme theory there?
Wait, what could be beneficial for the US? That the people move away from the dollar?
No, that there's war. There's more war again in the future. There's a large scale.
War. Well, many countries. There was a studies done recently about the U.S., since you asked about the U.S., and since 1789, when the U.S. started, the U.S. has been at war in every year except 18 years since 1789. In Washington, they like war. We're not very good at it anymore. We don't win them anymore like we used to, but we're always doing it. They're always doing it, I should say. You would think that people would have learned the lessons of history, that war is not good for anybody. But for some reason, and you go look back at every war, and whenever wars start, the people on both sides are shouting and enthusiastic and say, oh, the boys will be home by Christmas. Don't worry. We will beat those jerks. We'll tear them apart. And of course, like First World War, everybody was wildly enthusiastic in August of 1914. 6 months later, they were trying to, how the hell do we get out of this? How did we get in this foolish war? But then it always happens in the wars. But then it's too late. And it's going to happen again. You mentioned 2 or 3 that are happening now. I mean, I would like to sit down with everybody and say, let's not do this. This is insane. Doesn't matter. They will say, oh, you're a turncoat, you're a traitor, you're a blah, blah, blah. You know, you like the Germans. Yeah. Just for 1940. Yeah. Whatever it is. And if you sit up there and say, let's have peace, let's not do this, it's foolish. They always accuse you of being a traitor and a turncoat. I mean, this is not the first time this has happened. You can read about it and you'll see it always happens. So it's going to happen again. You mentioned Taiwan. The Pentagon, the Washington, has done studies that show that we would lose a war over Taiwan. It makes sense. I mean, I can look at a globe too. I can see where Taiwan is. I can see how difficult it would be for the U.S. or anybody to defend Taiwan and to beat the Chinese. But that doesn't mean they won't do it. You know, they get carried away with their emotions and their feelings. It's like investors. Investors do foolish things and have for decades. And the Pentagon will do foolish things. And unfortunately, I and my family and other Americans will have to pay for it.
Yeah.
And if you say this is crazy, they berate you and say, what's wrong with you? Don't you know we're America? And what's that term? American exceptionalism. American exceptionalism.
Yeah.
Yes, America is an exceptional nation. It's the largest debtor nation in the history of the world. No nation has ever been as deeply in debt as the U.S. We are an exceptional nation.
Mm. What does this period then remind you of? If you were to link it to the closest period in history, whether you want to go back 100, 200 years, or whether you want to go back 1,000 years, what does this period remind you of right now that we're going through in history? In fact, go back as far as you want in terms of history then.
Well, if you look back at any period in history, big wars always start with small wars at first. First World War, for instance, in 1912, the British and German royal families were great friends. They vacationed together, they intermarried, they had parties every year, every month. They loved each other. 2 years later, they were slaughtering each other in the trenches of Europe, hating each other. I mean, these things happen and always have happened. But if you look back in the years before 1914, there was a small war here, a small war there, which people didn't pay much attention to. The next thing you knew, an old man in Vienna, he was in his 80s, made demands on Serbia, where his son had been assassinated. He made 9 demands. The Serbians met 8 of those demands, and he said it's not good enough. And the next thing you know, the world was in World War I and couldn't get out of it.
Yeah.
Because an 80-odd-year-old guy said, I don't care. I am the Austro-Hungarian Empire. We're the richest, most powerful nation in the world. And my God, they were rich in those days and powerful. But, it was the end of Austria. After the First World War, there was no Austro-Hungarian Empire. Vienna was a shadow of itself. Austria was a shadow of its former self. And yet, this old man got angry and made demands, and governments went along with it, and then other nations went along with them, and they couldn't figure out how to get out of it. It was too late.
Yeah.
But that's happened every time. I told you, somebody should have said to Mr. Hitler, you're a goddamn fool. He was a fool, but that's not the point. You're a goddamn fool to invade Russia. He wouldn't listen. I mean, they sat down and said, they could have said, probably did sit down with him and say, look, you remember Mr. Napoleon? This is what happened.
Yeah. He
was the greatest conqueror in the world at that time. And you see what happened to Mr. Napoleon? It's going to happen to you too. He wouldn't listen.
Yeah.
He wouldn't listen. Even some of his generals tried to assassinate him and overthrow him.
Yeah.
Didn't do any good. And this is what happens in war.
I think that's really profound what you just said there, because you're right. It often doesn't come down to the will of the people. It comes down to perhaps one man who will make a decision like that, or one woman. We'll see for the future. We had Margaret Thatcher with the Falklands and all that. That was interesting. The UK, I don't know if you follow UK media at all, Jim, but they just put out all of in fact, 2 weeks ago now, the whole week, every news story was about conscription for the military. Every day. Yeah.
In London and UK?
In UK, non-stop, all day, every day for a week was about conscription. And they were saying that, so it wasn't saying you are now being conscripted. It said, how they do it with the media? They say, it looks as though there's going to have to be conscription because there just isn't enough troops to go to war with Russia. And if the UK goes to war with Russia, we need this amount of troops and whatever. So now I'm sat there laughing, going, oh gosh, UK versus Russia. Hold on, UK. But anyway, that's beside the point. But, these sort of things, I do laugh, and I see people take all this stuff seriously. Oh yeah, we need more numbers to beat. Okay, I'm a mathematician, so for me, it's not really difficult to calculate this, but I guess it is for some. But they've had all these warnings all like non-stop now, conscription, conscription, everyone's going to be conscripted. They even talked about one thing that surprised me, and they said it won't just be 18 to 40-year-olds this time. We're going to have to go down as low as 15 if they're quite, mature. They could be 15, and we need to go up to 55 years old.
Oh
Because
my.
they gave an example of, I don't know which country it was. It was a Scandinavian country. It might be Finland or somewhere like that. And they said they conscript up to 51 or 52 or something, they were saying. Someone can drop it in the comments if they know what it was, that story that came out. But it was just fascinating to me that we're seeing all this rhetoric now, combined with all the propaganda that is taking place as well. It's obvious to me and most of my subscribers which way that we're going, and they're pushing it further and further towards war. And that's a concern. And that's another reason that I'm always traveling around. I'm looking at who's offering the best deals in terms of residencies and where can you go and things like that. Um, I don't know if you follow Ray Dalio at all or some of his, I don't know if you ever read any of his stuff, but he put out a
Yes.
tweet that I saved here. And it was, I haven't got the exact tweet, so I'll paraphrase, but it was about civil war in the USA, which I thought, is this a parody account? Is this Ray Dalio's account? It actually was. He put out a tweet about civil war. And this was about 3 weeks ago, actually. And he said, I now see civil war in the USA with a 20% chance this year. And that really surprised me that we're seeing people putting out stuff like that now. And then, of course, now we've seen the Texas border and all these other issues. I guess my question is, what are you seeing with all of this conflict? Are you concerned for younger people today in all around the world with what you're seeing?
Well, I'm extremely concerned of what you just said about Britain. I mean, why does Britain want to go to war with Russia? I don't quite understand. Why are you going to suddenly start the draft, conscription, so you can go to war with Russia? Why don't? What about Germany too? You can go to war with Germany. Go to war with the U.S. Go to war with lots of people if you want to. What
Yeah.
is the? Why does the English press want to go to war with Russia?
There
Sell
is
newspapers?
there's the largest NATO exercise ever conducted right now, and this is 100% true. It is an exercise to overtake Russia, to conquer Russia. It's a NATO exercise with almost 100,000 troops, huge amount of equipment, and it's going on right now, and it's a 3 or 4 month exercise to
Wait, where are they practicing to take over Russia? In Scotland? I
no,
mean, where are they doing it?
no, it's in Eastern Europe. It's going on right now, this exercise. NATO.
You British troops are
Yep,
rehearsing taking over Russia.
correct. This is going on right now, this exercise.
And they don't have enough boys. They don't have enough young boys.
Well, that's what they're discovering. The commanders are saying, because they're doing all the pre-work at the moment, this is what they're saying. They haven't got the troop numbers. And also, they're kind of realizing now the men and women aren't in the best shape. That's another thing that's coming out from the reports. Yeah. There's I don't know. I think the whole thing is crazy. Should we actually move on to? I mean, do you want to comment on that? Because I want to ask you about BRICS as well. But do you want to comment anything on what I just said there?
Well, I am startled. I didn't know this was happening. I am surprised. Obviously, I'm against it. It's absurd. And again, people don't learn the lessons of history. Somebody in London should read a little history. Many people have tried things like this and have failed, or even if they think they succeeded. I mean, Britain won the Second World War, they think, but it was bankrupt. It was a disaster. I don't know if you obviously don't remember Britain in the late 40s, the 50s, or even the 60s.
Yeah.
It was a disaster. They got in 1976, it went bankrupt.
Yeah.
Because of lots of things like this. Oh my gosh. I guess we could go to London and say, hey, guess what? Read some history. They would say, you're a whatever.
Yeah.
So I am startled. I am dismayed. I am unhappy because if Britain is doing it, that means somebody in Washington is doing it too.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody in Washington is getting ready for who knows who we're going to attack next. Somebody, which is not good for the world. So back to your question. What was your question? You got me I got distracted.
No, I just wanted to know if you had any thoughts on it, because obviously you hadn't heard about that. I wanted to know your views on if you had anything to say. And actually, what you just mentioned there, I think, I may be incorrect, but I think the senior commander on the ground for that exercise is an American general. So there are US troops and equipment on for the exercise as well. So it's really ramping up, actually. It's really heating up, but the average person just thinks, oh, you're scaremongering, you know. When the media tells me, that's when it's true.
So this is a NATO exercise. It's not just the British Army. It's a NATO exercise.
NATO exercise.
Oh my God. And it's more serious than I realized.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, I said Washington likes war. Washington thinks we can win all the wars, that nobody can defeat America. The facts are obviously different. So I'll vote against it, but it doesn't matter. Because when hysteria, when war fever attacks, everybody is in favor. Everybody gets swept away with it. I mean, pick your country, any country. They're all very keen. They all say support the boys at the front, whether you're Germany in 1939 or America, now. Everybody will say support the boys at the front. And if you sit and say, oh, this is insane, the best support for the boys at the front is to bring them home. Everybody, what did you say you were? Whatever you are, peacenik. And people get swept away and say, don't worry, the boys will be home by Christmas. This is disturbing. I cannot imagine that anybody wants a war with Russia. I certainly don't. I don't want a war with anybody.
Yeah.
And it seems to me absurd.
Yeah.
So I guess my views are clear. This is all absurd. It's absurd from any point of view, manpower, economically, history, in every way.
Yeah.
Oh my! Now you've given me something to worry about.
Oh gosh,
the rest of the week.
That's what the subscribers say all the time. They say, "Oh, now you've given me something." Now, why did you tell me that, Neil? I didn't know. I was, what's the expression? Blissfully ignorant about it all. I wanna ask you about BRICS, actually. So with Russia, so Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. We've now got the new members. We've got Saudi and Iran, and so many new members that have actually joined now. Egypt, what's the other one? Ethiopia, I think Qatar is the other one. We've got all these new members. Argentina has sort of turned down it, and it looks like we might have another 10 to 12 new members joining in the next 12 months, or probably at the next BRICS meeting. Can you talk about what you're seeing with BRICS and how you see this playing out, especially for the US dollar?
Too many countries involved, it usually doesn't work. They talk a good game. They all go to the press conference. But if you have 20 countries, 30 countries, it just cannot work. There are too many different interests. So it's good news if you ask me, because that means it will not work. And said, oh, look at those big countries. He'd never been to most of them. He didn't know anything about them. He looked at his map and said, oh, those are big countries. It'll be a group.
Yeah.
It wasn't, it will not be, especially now that it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Yes, the world has had many times in history when countries have said we're all going to work together. It rarely has been successful. Rarely has it worked. Even the British Empire, which wasn't quite that kind of thing.
We're seeing a lot of breakdown in, well, I'm seeing personally, you may see it differently, but I'm seeing a lot of breakdown in globalization at the moment. And I wanted to ask you if you see the same, and if so, how do you see this affecting everyday citizens?
Well, we have discussed before that big wars start with small wars. We have a few small wars scattered around now, and maybe some more coming. And in history, back to previous periods of history, these things continue to expand and accelerate. And unfortunately, I see these things happening again. And I will shout from the rooftops, don't do it. You're crazy. Read your history. They don't do it. You know, the bureaucrats in country X and country Y shout at each other, continue to shout, and it gets worse. And it has always led to bigger wars or wider wars, which eventually everybody will say, how do we get out of this? How did we get in it? Now, how do we get out of it? And yeah, I would like to say, Neil, don't worry. Don't worry. It's not going to happen. It always has.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I'm afraid it will happen again. I see the same signs, read about the beginnings of the World War I, beginnings of World War II. You say this cannot happen again. It always has. And you and I and everybody watching this can shout from the rooftops and vote against it. But unfortunately, there'll be mobs who will say, you're a pacifist, whatever, you know, you're a friend of the enemy. But after a few months after the war, everybody will say, oh my God, how did we get in this? Oh my God, how do we get out of this?
Yeah.
And you can tell them, but they still won't listen.
Yeah. I just got one final question for you now then, Jim, and it's more of a financial question to end the video. Do you want to, if someone was to ask you for, you know, a tip on how they can best protect their finances this year, maybe they don't want to gain a lot, but maybe they don't want to lose their money, or you know, maybe you could share something in terms of asset allocation that you do, or you know, whatever you're comfortable sharing. Obviously, none of this is financial advice. Is there anything that you could share with the viewers?
Yes, it's straightforward and simple. Do not listen to other people. Maybe you could listen to Neil, but mainly don't listen to other people. If you want to be a successful investor, my advice is stay with what you know and you'll be successful.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Jim, for your time. Really appreciate it. Yeah, just so much wisdom from you. We all appreciate your time. So thank you so much.
Well, I just want to clarify, it is useful to listen to people and to get ideas, but when you make investments, stay only with what you yourself know a lot about. Now, if you get an idea from Sally, pursue it. do research. And if you know a lot about it, you might be successful. But don't buy something because Sally said buy it. Stay with what you know.
Okay. Thank you so much, Jim. Thank you.
My pleasure. You're fun as always.
Bye. Bye for now. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.